Okay, now we're recording. But Larry, it's really, really good to see you, and
Good to be with you.
thank you for doing this. So I wanted to come to you of everyone to talk to you about Harvard because I remember when you and I think, last spoke on the phone, and it was right after October the 7th, and you were, you know, very agitated about the silence from the administration back then. And I know that on the one hand, you've been very vocal in condemning the authoritarian manner of the way the Trump administration has come after Harvard, but you've also said that Harvard hasn't done enough in terms of fighting anti-Semitism. And I thought it'd be really helpful if you would walk us through, in a sense, your journey from October the 7th to where we are now. I think it'd be really, really helpful because you see both sides, as it were. And I think that's really helpful for people.
Let me
So
start. Let
go
me
on.
let me start with where we are now, and then I'll go back to October 7th. I think the right posture for
You've frozen.
I have to real ordinarily authoritarian overreaches on the part of the government, ignoring all the processes in the statutes, providing no opportunities for hearing, taking actions that are disproportionate and unrelated to the alleged failures of the university, even if one stipulates to the maximum extent that there are crazy professors of certain fields who are yelling about in completely inappropriate ways about anti-Semitism in one part of the campus. Why should diabetes researchers 7 miles away be losing their grants? And so, where the administration is, I think, has to be resisted. And I think, frankly, given all its good fortune, given all its wealth, given all its strength, if Harvard can't resist, who can?
Right.
And so Harvard has no opportunity but to resist. That said, I think the university in on a number of different dimensions is very much in need of reform and has reformed too slowly.
Right.
It is a wake-up call that after October 7th, when within 24 hours of that tragic event, a statement was circulated all over the world and picked up by newspapers all over the world with 30 Harvard groups asserting that Israel had it coming and that this was Israel's fault and exempting Hamas from blame. And Harvard, for some interval, didn't manage to respond at all,
Mm.
and then responded only by saying that this had been a great tragedy, not by condemning terror or sharply separating the university from the student groups. That was a major error. And the fact that that choice was taken was illustrative of a major cultural set of issues.
Well,
And
I remember we spoke at the time, and you pointed out to me, and I think you pointed out publicly, that Harvard did speak out over the racial protests, around police violence. They have spoken out among many other issues. I even read somewhere recently that you mentioned that Harvard took action if any of the students joined single-sex societies, it prohibited them from getting fellowships. So it was really the hypocrisy, right, that you were speaking out against then.
that's right. I felt that one needed to have some set of relatively consistent standards in responding to these events. And my conviction has always been that free speech really is sacrosanct, and you really can't go censoring people's speech. But you can do three other things. When their speech becomes threatening or interfering with the rights of others to go about their business of taking classes and going to the library and whatnot, then you have to take strong action. When the speech is being heard as representing the university, then those who lead the university have an obligation to separate the university from any impression that it is endorsing what people within it are saying. And as I like to say, academic freedom does not include freedom from criticism. And
Right.
so when statements are manifestly immoral or wrong, it's appropriate to point that out, to recognize that people have a free speech right to be wrong. But they don't have a free speech right to be heard without criticism and with respect, or to disrupt, or to represent. And I felt that the university had fallen short in terms of making that clear. And I think for some very substantial interval after October 7th, the university on is that that was in turn a manifestation of a broader set of phenomena, a lack of ideological diversity in the university community, with the concatenation of the fact that being virulently anti-Israel had become a kind of phenomenon of the left, and the very substantial leftward tilt in elite university communities, and a of identity politics that had gone really too far on our campuses. So I believed very much in the idea that a university like Harvard, if it wants to be excellent, cannot discriminate against anyone, cannot ever discriminate against anyone. And when there is any discrimination, there need to be aggressive efforts to root it out and to fix it. But when those efforts tilt into very strong reverse discrimination, or when those efforts lead to a inability to discuss uh, potentially controversial issues for fear of creating discomfort, then much that is the essence of a university is being lost. And so I believe that in spite of the fact that it is what the Trump administration is saying, it is incumbent on Harvard. And by the way, while Harvard is the name brand among universities, and the president reasons singled out, Harvard would be wrong for your list to think that the issues I'm talking about are not fairly pervasive leading U.S. universities. I don't think it is particularly better or on issues of diversity, on issues of identity. I think it's incumbent on universities that they are able to reform. And I don't think, frankly, they have done enough. And that has created more room for the wildly unreasonable Trump administration attacks to seem reasonable in some quarters.
So, can you walk us then inside, what it's actually been like on campus since, I mean, you spoke up. I mean, I think what you just said about reverse discrimination also going too far. Do you remember then all some businesses in New York and elsewhere rescinded job offers to people whose names had been attending pro-Palestinian organizations. And, there was a sense that maybe there was a question, did that all go too far as well? But Harvard, as we know, you then had Claudine Gay, the then president, come and testify before Congress. That didn't go so well, right? And she's then replaced by Alan Garber. And as far as I'm aware, there are then you have these two task forces set in place on campus to see what can be done. Meanwhile, you are writing and speaking as you always do. I mean, what's it like on there? What did you see? What do you see just sort of going about every day? I mean, what do you see? Do you see any changes or not really? I mean, obviously protests continued, right?
So there's a lot of in inside baseball Harvard stuff.
Yeah.
It's first, nobody should have the impression where or you're walking around Harvard being Jewish, you are feeling or discriminated against. Most have not had a single moment of feeling physically unsafe on the Harvard campus. I would have not the slightest hesitation telling any friend of mine who was Jewish, even who was to Harvard. So there are political statements of various kinds that I think are very unfortunate, but suggestion that it's an ongoing environment. That I would say is that I think we are very fortunate in our current leader, Alan Garber, who's a person of very great principle, a person of deep conviction around the best values, and he is someone who I admire very much. And I think after all the difficulties, and there was all sorts of complexity that went into it surrounding Claudine Gay's brief presidency, I think Alan has been a strong and a healing force in the community. That said, I do think that Harvard needs to accelerate its pace of change. It's been 20 months since October 7th. We're still talking about issues like ideological diversity. We're still talking about the ways in which discipline is going to be applied in uniform ways across different parts of our campus. And, it was halfway through World War II after 20 months.
Right.
And so I do think that the pace of change has been slower than I would have wished. And I think Harvard would be in a stronger position as it confronts the government if it had been able to move more aggressively on a variety of these kinds of issues that are of concern. And that's why I have wanted to keep pushing uh, on the internal reform issues. But I do think we have to keep a sense of perspective here. Take one example. If you ask yourself, what's the worst thing potentially can't come because they're foreigners.
Right.
And that is much worse than any bit of mistreatment or prejudice they have experienced when they have come to Harvard. So I hope even those who are most concerned about anti-Semitism will recognize that it is necessary to push back against the authoritarian tendency, just as I hope that those who are most concerned about the authoritarian will recognize that the fact that there is the authoritarian tendency doesn't mean that the concerns that are expressed by many people about the university are invalid or should not be addressed. And so it's one of those moments where you have to hold two fundamental ideas in your mind to make sense of the situation. And for me, those are resist and reform.
Got it. I think that's incredibly helpful, Larry. And I know that you're tight on time. So I'm gonna just for our last minute or two, just ask you because I know you're on the board of AI. Last week's exchange between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Um, should any of us be worried? I mean, does this have larger ramifications than a sort of online brawl between the richest man in the world and possibly the most powerful?
I think you said it well. It's an on current appearances, an online brawl between the richest man in the world and the most powerful man in the world, who were formerly very close friends and are now intensely insulting each other. And that's been surprising and striking to most observers, and I think they are right to be surprised and struck. I don't think any of us can predict how it's all going to play out. I think it is a reminder that of something that I think is very important, which is that the broad evolution of technology is very important in shaping what plays out in history.
Mhm.
And I rather suspect that when history of our time is written 75 years from now, I will not be here to see it. But when that history is written, I suspect that this being the decade of AI may be a larger story than this being the decade of Xi Jinping or Donald Trump or Elon Musk or anybody else. And so, as someone put it to me the other day, uh, tokens, the measurement of value within a large learning model, may trump uh, tariffs in terms of what's ultimately most important.
That's fascinating. Larry, on that note, thank you very, very, very much for your time and your insights. Really greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.